The Bring a Trailer Podcast. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the BAT Podcast. This is Randy Nonnenberg, co-founder and president of BAT. I'm super excited to have somebody from our BAT community joining here today, who you also may have heard about out in the broader car universe. Jim Farley is joining us, the current CEO of Ford Motor Company. He's joining us from Dearborn, Michigan, and we are super excited to have him here today and excited that he's a part of the BAT community. Jim, welcome.
Oh, so nice to be here. And thank you very much for having me on the show and also being on my Drive podcast. I love that, Randy.
Yeah, absolutely. We can talk about the Drive podcast. You had me as a guest there, as well as an illustrious list of all sorts of people. And I think you're in season 3 of podcasting. So you're kind of a pro. You may be ahead of me here on a podcast professional career if you need something to fall back on, or I do.
Yeah.
So that was great fun to chat with you about cars and Ford and history and some things. But you've had all numbers of guests on Drive. Tell our audience a little bit about Drive and maybe why you're doing it.
Well, I started 3 years ago. I wasn't quite sure, but I thought it'd be fun to talk about cars just for driving instead of the business and everything I'm used to talking about. So try to get some guests that people would relate to, like Tom Brady and others over the last couple of seasons. This season's a lot of fun. I have Gronk and Jay Leno and T-Pain and Vicky Butler Henderson. For those of you who watch UK shows, she's a really big presenter over there of a Top Gear, etc. And Frankie Muniz, who's a child actor who's turned into a NASCAR driver. So, talk to an astronaut from the UK. It's a great diverse show, and I try to make it about people's common experiences, like road trips, the first car, things like that we can all relate to, and kind of demystify some of these famous folks into just car people like you and me.
That's fantastic. Yeah, no, it's really fun. I heard of it because people forwarded it because BAT was mentioned long before I was on it in one of your early seasons. Somebody brought the car conversation back to BAT. I think it was Sydney Sweeney. She's bought a couple cars off BAT, and you guys kind of had a chuckle about BAT on there. So whenever BAT is mentioned, still all these 17 years later after starting BAT, whenever it's mentioned somewhere by someone notable, people are like, hey, Randy, check this out. Check out this moment that happened for BAT. So anyway, that was great fun. So people should go check that out. Obviously, they can find Drive on any podcast format out there. I listen to it on Spotify, and it's great. So that's going on in your life. But we also want to talk about your sort of car world. Obviously, you're running this gigantic operation at Ford, but you are always interesting to me because it's in your hobby, it's in your profession, it's kind of in your blood, I would say. And I know a little bit about your history. We talked a little bit about your history, and you're transparent about that on your podcast and elsewhere, but maybe our audience doesn't know too much about that. So if you tell us a little bit about where the car blood comes from for you.
Well, I grew up in Argentina and eventually made my way to the U.S. in my teens and got a paper route like most of my friends and got a Schwinn Stingray, and, I didn't have much to do on the weekend. We just moved to Connecticut, and I found that the Ferrari distributor for all of the U.S., Mr. Kennetti's operation was off the Post Road right near where we lived. So every Saturday we'd go down and, of course, spend time with the mechanics, the Italian mechanics, who would show me all the old race cars that he owned. And I started to really love cars that way. And, of course, Fangio was from Argentina, and he was, more than just a car driver there and a world champion. He was a mega star growing up. And so I really started to learn more about cars. And when I was 14, I drove a car across the country, a Mustang that I rebuilt the motor on. That was my first car. And so I started working on cars myself when I was pretty young. And when I went to graduate school at UCLA, I put myself through school working in Phil Hill's restoration shop called Hill & Vaughn. And they did a lot of the Pebble Beach winning cars. I'm an interior person, so I know how to sew, and got a job there for 2 years and really started to know about Pebble Beach. I met Brig Cunningham, who was a customer, and a lot of other, people for us Americans and I were working for Phil Hill, getting yelled at by a world champion. Our first world champion in the United States was pretty cool. And I had this parallel life. I worked in IBM and finance, and I decided to go into car business. I was scared because I thought it would ruin my love affair of cars, because it is a business. And I started at Lexus and Toyota at the very beginning in the 80s after I got out of graduate school. And I had this parallel life where I had a working career at car companies, and at the same time, I really devoted most of my hobby time to, working on my old cars and collecting cars and flipping cars and eventually racing cars and restoring them on, in the kitchen and everything else. And I think, I guess that's turns out to be kind of an oddity for car executives.
Maybe not as much back in the day. Do you think there were more car execs that were kind of doing that and had dirty fingernails and stuff back in the day?
I do. Oh yeah, for sure. I've done a lot of research on that question, and I would say there's kind of two types. There was the kind of bigger than life personalities that didn't know much about cars, and then there was the really serious engineers like DeLorean and others who became, more senior, and then you have the people who really get their hands dirty, and that tends not to be the case. There's a lot of people who own fancy cars or even race, but actually working on your car on the weekend is not typical, I would say, of all those people. There's a lot of car people, but as you know, the hobby is so diverse. There's not a lot of people building plastic models and underneath my 73 Bronco, changing the front axle. That is pretty rare, I find.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think it's necessary. I don't necessarily judge folks that don't
not
do
at
that,
all.
right?
Not
you
at all.
can be into cars in so many different ways, right? You don't have to.
Yeah, no, I'm not.
Change the oil.
I don't want to. Yeah, absolutely right. This just fits me and my son and my life, and that's kind of who I am. But no judgment at all. I mean, Lee Iacocca was an amazing executive. Carroll Shelby, I got to know him when I joined Ford. I mean, these are all incredible people, and they all have different connections to cars, as you said.
Yep. We see that in the BAT community is diverse, as you know, and some of them turn wrenches and some of them are in sales and some of them cars are just a Saturday thing. And it's all different stripes. So sometimes one group will say, well, if you haven't rebuilt the engine yourself, like you're not a true Mustang guy or whatever. Right. And I'm always like, no, there's some pretty legit folks that don't even know, how the piston rings work. And that's totally fine. Sure. And they all contribute in so many different ways. So I'm encouraged by that. But it is interesting to me because I just sort of have a lot of parallels to you and what you've done. I came out of working in a Mustang shop and having dirty hands and all that and climbing through the ranks. So that's encouraging. But one thing I want to touch on a lot of what you said, the Lexus component in the early days is fascinating to me. The working in your hobby. A lot of people congratulate me because I've gotten to work in my hobby.
Isn't that funny? We should talk about that because you're like, yeah, actually, it's not about the cars running forward. I wish it was. And it's probably the same for you. Everyone imagines our day probably totally different than people think I'm in the design studio, and that's not how it works. We're running a $200 billion business like your business. And it's different than what people imagine, which is fine.
Yeah. But even just the psychology of that, people are like, oh, that must be so great. But it can, I always respond to the question about how that is. Like it has good and bad. There are good days and there are bad days. Some days I wish I didn't work in what my weekend hobby is, right?
Totally.
Because you're very close to it and you can get burned out on it after years and years of working in the same industry. But you just need an outlet. I find that I just need an outlet elsewhere. Do you have those other outlets too? I think you're more than just a car guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm. Like most people, I cherish my time with my family. I have 3 high schoolers and my wife Leah, and I love the outdoors. I mean, if I had my preference, I wasn't doing Ford. I'd be hiking the Pacific Coast Trail or be out there camping for months at a time. Or I love motorcycling. And yes, it's a mechanical thing like cars, but what I love about motorcycles is more the people and the trips and, the escapism. I love mountain biking and, anything like that. I guess I'm always trying to compete against myself.
It's good to hear just a little bit of context from folks, because you're in the headlines a lot, obviously for Ford and
sure.
The direction of the company. I associate you very closely with a lot of the product that's coming out.
Yeah.
But to hear people's backstory, and I think people, the BAT community will touch there right now. Your interaction with the BAT community and your experience there, I'd love to hear A, where you found it, but B, I want to talk about the Pantera. You made a purchase on BAT, which means you're more than just a passing interest in BAT. You're like a legit participant. So we can talk about the Pantera, but where did you first find BAT? Where did it, or did it find you?
First early days, like literally the first time it came up as a site, I found it fascinating. And of course, I've been flipping cars my whole life. I bought my first Cobra, sight unseen, so to speak, or that was kind of a funny story, but I had a lie to my wife and fly to upstate New York, and the guy blindfolded me, and I thought it was gonna be like, I don't know, it's like a bad movie or something, but he wound up being an amazing person. And I've been flipping cars like that, including GT40s or whatever. I've moved up the ranks, so to speak. But I lately have been really enjoying working on cars as a winter project. So I'll buy a car like the Pantera and I'll work on it all winter. And I don't want to buy a car that, has paint work or requires heavy maintenance. But I go through the car, I have a list of 40 or 50 things. And by the time spring rolls around, it's a great running car. I did that with my 73 Bronco and now with the Pantera. And I got a couple friends that help me. Now my son's helping me. So I just love that ritual. But on the site, I'm a comments person. I love going through the comments. I'm Ford Man 21. So you guys can look at my negotiation habits. I tend to be not a good negotiator. I would say I kind of like show my hand a little too early, and then I wait till the very end, and then I give myself like a number, and I can't go by the number. I think that's a good policy. But I've really enjoyed bidding on cars and Bring a Trailer. I like the kind of idea that I'm in the boardroom and submitting a new offer under the desk, so to speak, or at some place where you shouldn't have your cell phone. And I just love the diversity on the site. I can kind of collect virtually, visually. I love the videos of people driving the cars. There's so much to love about Bring a Trailer, and I've kind of fallen in love over time as you guys changed the product. You've made it really different and better, and that's been more fun. I have to say, though, that I spend most of my time on the 5 to 6 day old inventory before it gets expensive or before people start weighing in. I like being there early and following a car.
How do you have time to do all this, Jim? You're a busy dude.
Yeah, we all have we all have 5 minutes. I can find 5 minutes before I go to bed, or at 5:30 in the morning, and I'll just look it up. And I think we're gonna all find 5 minutes.
Yeah, for sure. My 5 minutes tends to turn into 5 hours if I'm not
careful. So that part I don't have. I was like, that's it, and then I'm gone. Yeah, I have to leave. Yeah.
I love it. Well, you can tell, I consider you a product guy. You talk a lot about Ford product, and now you're even digging into aspects of the BAT product. You said maybe talking about that would be an interesting topic for us to chat about today. I would love to hear your ideas or your thoughts. And obviously we'll talk about broader car industry stuff later as well. There's a lot that I'd love to get to, but since you touched on it here, what aspects of diving around in BAT is
I have a couple of friends, so BAT's turned into a social thing for me. So I think so many of your customers and clients. So I love comparing like odd cars that are on BAT. Like if there's a Pinto station wagon with a orange velvet, interior, I love sending that out to my friends. And, I love tracking, good values, really bad buys, like someone paid way too much for something. I love kind of building new categories. You have like British cars and German cars. You have your categories. I have my own categories. Like I would love to create my own category of like really strange cars in the 70s that are oddly preserved. Because I grew up in the 70s and it was a really bad time for the car industry. There was not a lot of good cars. And I was in a lot of those cars, and, they come up on BAT, and some of their just like, how did that not get thrown away or crushed? And I love those kind of categories, like super good value categories. That'd be one. The other one would be like a more of value line. Look, let's be honest, things at BAT have gotten really expensive, and we love it that way. And there's no mystery. What I love is the ethos that everything is disclosed. That is amazing how you've created that expectation that if you're going to sell something, disclose everything. And if you want to get a premium, the more you disclose, the better. But the other side of that is, wouldn't it be great if there was a value oriented? Like my kid, Jameson, he's He's got a 1990 Mustang, like a drag car that he's building. And he bought on Facebook Marketplace. And I think it's interesting, your competitors have changed, just like our competitors have changed. Look at China. And I would love BAT to have kind of more of a value line. It takes a lot of time to find a value-oriented car on the site. And that would be really fun to have a category like that. But what I really love is it'd be great to virtually collect, to create a collection, a virtual collection that you could price over time. Like you could use the market and BAT could price it over time to see if you made a good decision or not, and how your collection, did in the marketplace, so to speak. A kind of fantasy league for our industry.
Oh, I like those. I'm going to have my product guys listen to this podcast. This is red meat. This is good stuff.
Good stuff, man. What a great platform you have.
Yeah, it is evolving, I mean, there's so much that we can add to it, and there's so much that people want, and we hear feedback all the time, as I'm sure you do.
Yeah. Is there any way you could rate notes? Like, because I love the notes. Personally, that's like what I love the most, is going into a car at the very end of the auction, not when it's bought yet, and see how all the notes evolve and all the technical aspects of the car and how engaged the seller were in responding to the notes and how thoughtful the notes were. Some of them are really cheeky. Some of them are funny. It's like a social thing. It'd be great to kind of be able to meet the people that make the notes, because I'm starting to recognize some people, like that person is really detailed about Mini Coopers. And that I think that's a social aspect of the platform that could evolve.
Yeah, absolutely. We do a series called 10 Questions with some of the most notable commenters. And just
really?
Get a little, like, where are they from? Like, what's their deal?
Yeah.
Who's there? The 10 quick shots with a bunch of them. And we've done a few dozen of those, because there are people that sort of rise to the top. Yeah, in a Mini Cooper listing, like the same folks will show up and be like, who is, how do they know so much about minis and what's going on? Or how do they know about E-types? Like E-type guys are deep in that world. But no, that's great. That's great advice. And the fact that you haven't heard of it means we need to publicize it more or make it more visible. But we share your sentiment on that. And the community component of BAT obviously is such a differentiator. So it's interesting to hear your feedback on wanting to hear more. Tell me about the social dynamic of, you say you kind of send around links, or you send around a Pinto interior to your buddies.
Yeah, like Colin Comer in Wisconsin's a good friend of mine. And Colin and I are always going back and forth about, like, those kind of cars. And then it gets into the phrases, if it's rocking, don't come on knocking. And, you have all of the memories and the perspective as a car person over your life that you want to compare with a friend. And, these cars always bring back fun memories of, the first 8-track. Well, mine was a Peter Frampton, and someone else had something else, like Colin. Anyways, I love taking cars and making the link and pushing it to a friend that it's relevant. And then we can connect outside of just, being friends. We can have a little escapism, a little daydreaming about whether we would want to buy this car, whether it's worth as much as it should, or whether this comment was valid or not. I think that aspect, it certainly enriches my life more than actually the cars, being able to connect with people over our passion.
Absolutely. I do that with my dad. I got a text thread with my dad and my uncle. I've got now
there you
text
go.
thread going with my boy, and we're just sending BAT links back and forth, and buddies and all sorts of stuff. So I love hearing stories like that. A lot of family stories, a lot of, my old college buddies that I sending stuff around, like those stories bubble up. The social connection component of BAT makes me really, really happy. And thankfully we don't all have to go mine Craigslist to go find links to send. We can just kind of go to BAT and get a better hit rate,
And it's good to see. I love the fact that you take the time to track the market, so you can see, general trends in the market. I always go into the cars that I know a lot and look back 4 or 5 years over the auctions and see the diversity of the data. It's much more rich than, Hagerty valuation and some of the other kind of single point estimates. I really love learning about how the market is changing.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about you listed off some interesting brands. Obviously, BAT, one other thing I love about BAT is the breadth and the variety. So you say Lexus, and it's not a dirty word on BAT. It's a great opportunity. And you said you worked at Toyota and now Ford. you said Lexus in the 80s. I mean, that's like almost back to launch of Lexus, right? Its birth. I mean, that must have been an interesting time to be working there.
It was. And people don't realize, there was not many of us. It's a very small group. I was the product planner. I came up with this thing we proposed to Japan called the RX300 before it was an RX300. It was really fun. It was a small group. We were the last of the Japanese to get into the luxury car market. Acura was there a long way before we were, and then Infiniti launched the Q45 right before our LS. And, we really knew that we had to bring our A game because the others had really great product. Infiniti had the rocks and the kind of very organic design. And of course, Acura had already been well established with the Legend product. And so we had to bring our A game and do something different. So the idea was, let's combine the world's best experience. Dave Illingworth and Dick Chitty came up with this idea of treating people as a guest in your home. So we put like car washes in all the dealerships, and that was like shocking. It was like, why do I need to put a car wash in my dealership? There's a car wash down the street. It's like, well, no, because we want you to wash every car. And they're like, well, I would never do that. And I said, well, yeah, if you want to be a Lexus dealer, you're going to wash every car, and you're going to have a brunch on Saturday and welcome all the owners. And, we really embraced this idea of treating people as guests, and then having product that was silhouette innovations, like the first Lexus Coupe that was more advanced and more different. And then kind of the next generation of quality. We wanted, Lexus to kind of be the quality leader for Toyota. And so we thought that NVH was going to be the next level of quality outside of reliability. And that's why the LS was so quiet and focused on, low NVH, which winds up being, then delegated or democratized to Toyota. That was the purpose of the division. It was really exciting. It was not a big group. And we really had a lot of pressure to perform because we were quite far behind others.
And this was all out of Torrance in Southern California?
Yes, in Torrance. It's interesting. Lexus is a synthetic brand. It's not like BMW and Mercedes or other premium brands that kind of grew up kind of finding its way through their voice and the product. It was a self-created synthetic brand, I would say. And it came from America. Lexus was never launched outside of America until many years after. It's now around the world. But it started in the US, and then it grew globally. And it had a lot of growing pains and a lot of, I launched Lexus in Europe, and it was not a success. The first IS was not a successful product to compete with the 3 Series, rear-wheel drives, sport compact coupe and 4-door. So there was a lot of experimentation. There was no guarantees that we would be successful, but the RX totally changed everything. With that product, literally one product, we became the best-selling luxury brand in the US, which was really shocking because we went from like 50, 75,000 to, way over 100. We didn't have many dealerships, so it was like a big surprise to us that one product could change a brand so much, but it did.
Wow. It's so cool that you were there at that moment. I actually remember that. I mean, the IS, when it was released, a rear drive. So you say it wasn't a success, but it was interesting, and it got a lot of the magazines wanted to write about it because it was a departure, right? A rear drive Japanese. So now you can get a stick in it. It had the chronometer dials and I was in Europe actually doing an internship for BMW, which is kind of where I got my start in the business.
I see.
And that car was meaningful. I went to a dealer in Europe to find one of those and look at it because I was like, this is an unusual offering, and that it was a Lexus. So anyway, that was an interesting time.
It was. And, I was able to be at the beginning of the Scion launch, and I was a head of Scion when we were launching, and that was a really interesting process because we were able to really study Saturn very carefully, what worked and what didn't. And, I went to Europe with Toyota as an American and helped launch kind of their first indigenous products in Europe, a Yaris and all of that. It was, diesel engines, lots of strange stuff over there. So I was lucky. I got to do a lot of unique things. I was mostly in product planning, working on the first Tacoma. I was the project leader for the Tundra when we tried to take on the domestics on the full-size pickup truck. So I was able to see Ford as a competitor.
Super interesting. I like car industry insider timelines and product launches and that sort of stuff. So anyway, I kind of geek out on that stuff. So I love hearing your stories from those brands and just remembering those times and the competitive landscape in those years and what was going on. So that obviously has sort of formed you and your journey. And then you come back to, run Ford, a very American brand. And its journey has also been interesting, sort of veering more towards enthusiast, I think.
Yes, for sure.
In a lot of positive ways. And I love to see that. Naturally, I think a lot of people listening have loved to see the Mustang be vibrant and see the Bronco resurgence and all these things that you've had that isn't just you. Obviously, you have a very large team, but
great team.
You have been sort of at the helm while that happens.
Yeah, I really felt like, every car company has its natural state. What it wakes up in the morning, metaphorically on Monday, and does without trying really hard. And, Ford does enthusiast products, off-road and commercial, almost better than any company I've ever had. I've had to compete, as I said. And I really believe that the best way for a car company to be its best self is to lean into what it does naturally well. Instead of looking at it as kind of a full lineup and you have to do everything, yes, there's some aspect of scale that makes a huge difference. But, at Ford, our idea is like no boring products. And, that doesn't mean that we live in the past either. It means we're going to have a Mach-E and we're going to, always test with an EcoBoost Mustang. And we're going to be the Porsche of off-road enthusiasts. But we'll do it our own way with Raptors and Broncos and Tremors and not someone else's way. And we believe deeply in racing and tying that back to the business, but we also love our commercial business and our retail F-150 and pickup truck business. We're now the largest pickup maker in the world. That wasn't the case. When I joined the company, we were 14th with Ranger around the world, and Hilux was way ahead of us and number one, and we're now number two to Hilux. We have 5 plants around the world that make Ranger, and it's our second best-selling vehicle globally. And we love our commercial lineup with Transit and all the different kinds of Transits around the world. And of course, Super Duty and our commercial lineup. And now that includes software and, repair services. So that's changing a lot. Hey, I think we're sticking to our knitting, but we're going to grow. And we're going to grow by doing what we naturally do well, accentuating what our team members love doing, and then pushing the envelope in a few new areas like EVs.
It's exciting to watch. I love being there. I kind of want to be behind the curtain sometimes, but I also like being on this side of the curtain, so I can kind of just be the
spectator. It's a lot of hard work.
See which levers you pull. Picking which lever is your problem. You got to figure it out and navigate that. And we get, honestly, the consumers get to benefit from that so much with the competition and the evolution of things. So I've enjoyed that quite a bit. We see a lot of variety on BAT. We're selling Raptors on BAT that are secondhand in all the generations, right? And it's been interesting to see.
My dealers are so upset at BAT because the first thing I do when they charge over sticker price is I go on BAT and start sending the dealers, because I know what dealer lives in which area. So I'll just go on BAT. Oh, okay, that's 10 grand over sticker. That's again the same dealer in South Carolina trying to do this. And then I send it to my salespeople, and the people are like, could you stop sending us BAT screenshots? Like, no, I'm not going to.
It's pretty clear evidence, isn't it?
It is totally. It's a marketplace, so it's completely efficient. And to me, it's, as a CEO, it's a great, because I want to have all my vehicles on BAT being sold, because that shows that we're getting the product right and people want to buy them. And there's too few of them. So yeah, it's a great resource for me on my job too.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I've fantasized on some level of having new cars sell through BAT and setting a price in that way, because it's so efficient in how it sets the price. But that's not, obviously you have a very meaningful relationship with your dealer network, and there's a bunch of
there are a lot of laws about that.
Yeah, there's laws, there's politics, there's all sorts of stuff that relates to that, and much of that is really great. But I've always wondered, like at the beginning, there's all this demand and things are selling way over sticker, and then they settle the sticker, and then by the end of the run, often they're being discounted like crazy to move them out the door. So the price, it's almost like the customer, that number that's picked, you have teams of marketing people that pick what MSRP is and
they're almost always wrong.
And
they're almost always wrong.
Well, if they are, you have to make all these adjustments.
Oh yeah, it's really difficult. Ship patterns and supplier capacities, and I laugh about when I work at a brand like Toyota. We made so many. We used to laugh. Vanilla is the best-selling flavor of ice cream. Because, we sold a lot of Corollas and Camrys and those kind of vehicles. But, in that kind of company, when you have a sports car, it's like, it feels like the company kind of has a memory lapse. So it goes, we got to do a Supra or fill in the blank. Then they come out with it, and then for 2 years, you look like a freaking hero. And then after everyone who wanted one got one, there's no more demand. It falls off immediately and steeply. And then you have like 6 years to forget about the fact that it didn't work that well. And then someone comes around about 7 years later. I'm not joking. It's like 7 or 8 years. And they go, we need to do another Supra. And you're like, wait a minute. What? We already tried. What? And then we do it again. MR2. I've seen it in 40 years career. I've seen it like 5 full cycles of being excited, then being really depressed, then forgetting about it, and then getting excited about it. The good thing at Ford is we never kind of got out of the Mustang business. So we have a good core group.
That's really funny. But they come back and they're going to do it again. It's almost like going back to the pain again.
Absolutely.
But the highs are so high. I guess the lows are pretty low, but the highs are really, really high, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of publicity.
It's a total Greek tragedy. It's a Greek tragedy that's going to play out in front of all of us as car people. You know exactly how it's going to end. I'll give you 6 sports car nameplates and you go, yep, they're in this 5th to 6th year cycle.
Oh my goodness. What those NSXs are worth now and people are paying for them. But at the end of the run of NSXs, they couldn't move those things at all. They couldn't give them away.
When I joined the company, they had like 3 auto show cars, 05 GTs that you could buy in the company for $110,000. And they were like single digit serial numbers, and no one would buy them. Can you imagine buying a Heritage 05 GT at $120,000?
Oh man,
they were everywhere. They were everywhere.
Well, if those are lying around, if those one-offs are still lying around, and we're in the tragedy part of the cycle, and you want to put something on BAT, raise some funds.
You just described the whole. That's what we do as car people. If you want to flip cars, that's what you do. You figure out exactly where you are in the cycle, and it's pretty predictable.
Oh man, I love thinking about that. And that those things stand the test of time though, right? Those are what's like you mentioned, like MR2. I mean, those are popular on BAT, like a clean, low mile manual transmission MR2, like brings a bunch of money now, right? And so I don't know, there's some sort of 20, 30 years later resurgence. I don't think any of the marketing people are still around that cared about those decisions, but
no. There's a couple that don't make it, like a Stealth, like a 3500 Mitsu. Those were really cool cars. They just never made it through they didn't make it through. It does happen.
They didn't make it through tragedy phase
that was a full on. There was no second try.
How many employees are at Ford worldwide now? Is that
under 200,000? We have about 180,000 people that I think about every day. My grandfather was an hourly worker here at the Rouge plant, started Highland Park building Model Ts.
Wow.
And he was the 389th employee of the company. So I came back largely because of him. He got me excited about reading automotive news when I was a kid. And, we have 180,000 people, and we have to make really good decisions as leaders of the company so that they can have wonderful lives and we can hire more, because a job at Ford is a great job. You can have an amazing career in life if you work at Ford, but we have to do our job as leaders.
Yeah, talk about leader. Where I was going with that is sort of leadership philosophy and your ability, like when you're walking the halls. I don't know what people listen to the podcast are thinking, but I envision you obviously in a variety and a lot of travel all over the place worldwide, but also just sort of walking the halls of Ford. Like what's going through your head in terms of connecting with people and shepherding not only the product and the offering, but the team that's around it. What goes through your head?
Well, I would say people would call me as a very intense leader who is very focused on excellence. I was very formed with my Toyota experience. So I really expect the most out of people, often more than they expect out of themselves. And I demand the very best for Ford because I think Ford deserves the very best out of everyone. At the same token, I really believe in going and seeing. So I do a lot of plant visits. I always walk the floor wherever I am, engineering studios, whatever. I say hello to everyone. I want to know what they're doing because I love what we do. But more importantly, I want to connect with people at a human level so that I can understand how to make good decisions. Sometimes that's just seeing how hard they work and putting that kind of pressure on yourself to make good long-term decisions for the company. Any CEO has to make choices between short and long-term. And there's no easy answer. There's no actual answer. It only emerges in retrospect and whether you were right or wrong. And there's a lot of critiques because there's a lot of uncertainty in our industry about how customers or regulations are going to change. But I really believe going and seeing. Gemba is a Japanese term for going and seeing with your eyes. If you want to solve a problem, I believe, do not make any big decision before you go to where the problem is most acute or what you're trying to solve, and learn with your eyes and your ears and talk to people before you make any big decision.
That's cool advice. I appreciate that. That sounds like that was from your Toyota days, a little Japanese wisdom.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I learned so much at Toyota. It's such an amazing company, but it didn't apply that process to emotional products as much as it could have. And, that's the combination we want to get right here. World-class durability, totally competitive cost, but most of all, like passionate products. So I'm very intense when we talk about concepting, like the Maverick. There's only 2 small unibody pickup trucks in the US. When I joined the industry, we sold 800,000, Toyota pickup trucks the year I joined Toyota. And, there's a huge market for entry-level pickups, but the Rangers and the Tacomas are all $40,000 vehicles now. Mm-hmm. So we came up with the concept of taking the Focus platform and making a pickup truck and making it a hybrid with 40 miles per gallon, but making the bed flexible so you can go buy a 2x4 or whatever from Home Depot and kind of hack the back for not a lot of money, and then don't overinvest in tech on the inside of the car to try to keep it, really affordable, around $30,000. That concept we developed in 2 years. It was off a Focus platform. It's a pickup truck, and it's our hottest selling vehicle in North America. So I put a lot of pressure on my team because our product cycles are 5 to 10 years. And so if you can get to a Maverick before Toyota does or Nissan does, you have a 5-year advantage. And, I put a lot of pressure on our team to really make breakthroughs at the concept level, because I learned that as a young man with the RX 300. There was really no competition. The Mercedes ML, that was it. And we had the market to ourselves for a long time. And that's what you want to do. You want to innovate for the customer, do it faster than your competition, get that 3 or 4 year advantage, and then make sure the next one is even better. But don't make it heavier and more expensive like you did with XB. That was a mistake. Be true to the original concept. Yeah, that's my philosophy. Put pressure where you're going to see a big difference as a company.
Interesting. I love how you can talk sort of philosophically, but also weave in different products that have kind of been milestones along the way. I think that's actually really interesting and cool. We listed an interesting Maverick, at least one on BAT, which it may be a surprise. I mean, it's such a newer, innovative type of product, but it was like a crazy SEMA build or something.
Oh, okay.
What it was, but we had one of those go through BAT recently. I like those. I like that product quite a bit. It's an interesting topic that I'd love to hear your take on how it's going to impact the car industry and maybe your point of view at Ford in particular. As things automate and, obviously your factories are so mechanized and different parts of the business, but throughout the business, more things are going to be automated in the future. In the car business, what are the human parts, the most human components of Ford moving forward? Meaning, is it the designers will always be people that are like things are bouncing around in their head, or is it?
I love this question.
In the factory, like I toured some factories in Italy that are building exotic stuff, and there were young folks turning wrenches, hand assembling engines, and I was like, man, that's nice, but that's not cost effective at all, right? So I mean, there's a bunch of parts, but what are going to be 10, 20, 30 years down the road, the parts where super smart people are very required for a mobility or a car company like Ford?
What a great question. Well, first of all, my answer to your question may surprise some people. So just hang on for a second. Hang with me for a second. The first one I believe is that clay modelers are still going to be around and very busy. The form of an automobile is a very subconscious, emotional creation process. And the clay modelers are very close. So how a stamping machine stamps a panel, we have a certain amount of draw, a certain amount of about 50 millimeters that we can play with. That's the only depth that we can play with. That's the most you can do. With steel, aluminum's a little different. And the clay modeler is so close. Human process of getting that close to a car, like kind of washing your car times 400. The process of a designer and a clay modeling interacting with each other to get all of those subconscious emotional shapes just right, I don't think it's going to change with AI or anything, because cars are emotional and it's a human process of creating one. That's one. Another one would be the creativity of our software engineers. We can have all the AI create great software, but in the end of the day, a human being has the creativity to make software feel super simple, super complicated. And the logic in that, sure, you can automate some of it, but a lot of it is just human judgment and knowing how humans work. Right now, the inside of a car is not like your cell phone. It's 400 times more complicated, and there's safety critical systems that are coming up. Even with level 2, level 3 autonomy, the car has to engage and disengage with the customer. That's a much difficult problem to solve than your phone. And so having a software engineer that understands how a human has to grab a hold of the steering wheel or disengage when level 3 eyes off the road happens on highway high speed autonomy, that is going to be a human skill. It's a human judgment, and we can build the software using AI, but there has to be a human that designs it for humans, because we have only so much cognitive ability. I think in the manufacturing process, that is going to be more and more automated. We now have robots that go around our plants who are just smelling for lubricant oil that's burning, or listening for a bearing going out on a conveyor. We're going to have more and more automation in our manufacturing. But the fact is, you can't build an entire car at this point in time with robotics efficiently. The technology is too expensive. And so this is going to sound interesting or surprising, but we're actually designing the new manufacturing process for our Skunk Works, our affordable EV that's designed in California by a bunch of, basically non-Ford people for the last 2 years. The vehicle will be coming out in about a year and a half. And we design the entire manufacturing process around our operators. That means the human person building the vehicle. So some parts of it, we're using text. So we'll put in the computer right after paint, because then it can evaluate whether connections are made successfully. And we don't need any camera systems to look over our operator's shoulder anymore, because the computer's put in so early in the process, it self-diagnoses whether it's being built correctly or not. On that perspective, it's very automated. On the other perspective, we kit the vehicle, put all the parts inside the vehicle, and we build the front and the sides differently than what we do today. Today, we have a body shop. It makes the whole body. We take the doors out. People can go in and out and kind of build the car. We don't think that's how car production should be for a small vehicle. We want to open the car. And we learned a lot from Tesla in this aspect, so that the operator can actually walk inside the car. And if you close off the front, you can't do that. So you have to open the car so that the operator can actually walk inside the car, build it around them, and then finish the front of the vehicle and attach it. That's a totally different way, very human orientation, because the human body works a certain way, and there's a lot of operations that we still can't do in an automated way. And maybe the weirdest one is putting on a badge. You think it would be super automated and whatever. We take the best people with tactile feel and the best kind of sense of space, and those are the people that put on badges. And it's an incredibly human process. And when we've had robots do it, they get it right for 1,000 times, and then they get it wrong. And then you have to redo it, and it's a really bad process to redo. So there are actual jobs that I believe in the manufacturing system will always be human doing it.
Fascinating. I think that's interesting, just worldwide and industry-wide and business-wide, like thinking about where I talk about this with my young teenage kids about like what kind of jobs in the future are going to be really human and really valuable and really interesting. And they're different than when I was coming up and you were coming up. The types of roles are different. So to hear you speak about that in such a large industrial operation as building cars and designing cars, the clay one surprises me. All the other things, the badges thing is kind of an interesting anecdote, but all the other things make sense. But the clay modeling, I would have thought you would have said that will, like, clay models will go away and it would be some sort of digital image that's flipped around in VR or whatever. But you don't think so?
No, I really don't. And it's not because I'm an old guy and I don't like new ideas. I love new ideas. It's probably one thing that distinguishes me. But I really believe that I learned this from Hill and Vaughn. When I sat around at break at 10 o'clock in the morning with the people that did, I remember, but I wasn't a body guy. I was the interior guy. And the body guy goes, hey, Farley, you're the new guy. Hey, tell me if this panel's flat. And I put my 2 fingers on the panel. I'm rubbing back and forth. And he goes, is that how you touch your girlfriend? I was like, no. I use my whole hand. He goes, yeah. So, and I put my hand on there and I could tell all these imperfections that I couldn't feel with my fingers. And I say that story because you cannot believe how much a designer needs to know about the stamping process and the variability of stamping over time to get a design right. And you can't believe how much a clay modeler knows about all of that. And they can really help. I've just seen a relationship between a clay modeler and a designer. And also there's another reason too. Clay modelers are really honest. So when I go around the design studio and I go, what do you think of the new Bronco? And it's like, it's awful, Mr. Farley. Don't build that. And then I'll go in the design studio and they're like, here's the new Bronco. What do you think? And I'll go, I don't like it. There's another reason, because they get so close to the model. It's like washing your car. But they don't wash the car. They build it centimeter by centimeter by hand. And that process allows them to really, as a human, understand every aspect of the design. And they're very honest. And so they're a resource for us because, like all humans, we fall in love with our own ideas. And a designer's going to go, this looks great, doesn't it? Maybe not.
It's great insight. I love hearing all about that, all the ins and outs. I haven't followed up at all. I mean, working in Los Angeles for Phil Hill and his operation there, that will resonate. I mean, some of this car design stuff and some of the industry stuff will resonate.
I have a couple of great stories about working there.
Yeah. That one you just told was mostly PG-13. I worked at a car race shop, and that was, I mean, it gets much more crazy than that.
Salty.
With the mechanics and salty, certainly. But what stories could you share from there?
Kind of my favorite one for Phil was, like, Phil, people didn't realize Phil was just the most amazing mechanical person I've ever met, actually. And I met a lot of incredible mechanical capable person. Like, it surprises me that none of the cars he ever raced broke, or he had that reputation because I work for him. Anyways, he goes, hey, Farley, you know how to drive a Packard? I'm like, yeah, my grandfather knows how to, we restored a Packard anyway. So I knew how to drive Packards. He goes, hey, we have a customer in Beverly Hills. We need you to drop off the car. So I drove the Packard over to Beverly Hills from Santa Monica. I got there and the customer, very nice man, super wealthy. And he goes, hey, Jim, I have a car in the back that I need you to deliver to Phil. And I said, well, did you call Mr. Hill? And he goes, no, I haven't. But, don't worry about it. I know Phil really well. Just drive the car down there. So we go to his garage, and it's a Gullwing. And it's before Gullwings were like super expensive, but I knew it was like, whoa, I'd never seen one before. And it had a bunch of bad gas in it, and he hadn't used it in like 20 years. And he goes, don't worry, we'll get it started. Just drive it back down to Santa Monica. And I'm like, well, I'd feel a lot better if you call Mr. Hill. And he goes, no, yeah, it'll be fine. Don't worry. So of course I drive in the parking lot, thing's smoking. It's running terribly. And Phil comes flying out of his office downstairs. He always listened to opera, Italian opera, and I could hear it going. And he comes, he goes, what are you doing? And I go, well, the customer. He goes, what do you mean? I told you to call me anytime a customer asks you to do something you don't know how to do. I was like, I know, Mr. Hill, I'm so sorry. But like, he was so insistent, and he portrayed it like you would have no big deal. He goes, you just drove $1 million car with no insurance. Like, don't ever do that again. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. He goes, open the boot and let's get this gas out of it. So I go over the boot while he's still watching me, and the key breaks in the key cylinder. And I'm like, oh my God. And in the Go-Wing Leasys one, you have to open the boot to fill up the gas.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm holding this key that's broken now. And the other half of it is in the lock cylinder. And I look at him and he goes, "Oh, wonderful. Go get a rope." And at this point, like, you know how the shops work, like, people, all the other guys are starting to come around to see this total goofball Farley mess up this whole situation. So they're all around the car. And I was like, the rope, is he going to put a noose and like a joke or something? So he gets a rope and he goes, "Go on the other side of the car." And the lock cylinder had like this very nice little handle.
Little hook. Little
hook where you put your finger. And he goes, "Put it around that hook. And then I want you on the count of 3. We're both going to pull as hard as we can." And I don't know how this guy knew this. The whole hood flexes and pops right up. I'm like, how does a Formula One world champion know that we're not going to break the sheet metal on this aluminum alloy $1 million car? So it pops open, and of course we get the gas out, and I'm like, "Phil, how did you even know to do that?" He goes, "Yeah, that's the right thing to do." So I was so amazed by someone who was so accomplished, but still had this kind of sixth sense of how to work on a car. I loved that experience with Phil. I never forgot it. Never.
That's a fantastic story. I really appreciate you relaying that, man. Yeah. I can imagine that moment. What a crazy moment. And busting off the key is such a classic, like bottom of the totem pole move for the lot guy. Yeah,
idiot. 2 strikes on my way to 3rd strike for sure. And all the guys in the shop are like, "Oh, you have no future." I'm sure they're looking at me like, "That's the same guy? Oh my God." He was a marginal sewing guy. He was marginally good at sewing alligators and frog interiors, which is what I did.
There you go, man. Unbelievable. Well, I love it. We're pretty much at our time. You're a busy guy, and I got to get you going. You did say one thing that I'll have you maybe sign off with. You say you're working on these cars as winter projects. You got the Pantera. Maybe you got through the punch list on the Pantera. Maybe you didn't. Does that mean you sell them right away and go get another one next winter? Or is the Pantera a keeper? Or are all these cars keepers? Or what are you doing? It is
such a good question. And I know all your listening audience would respond the same as I drive it and then I decide. Is this a car? And I have a rule. If I don't drive a car for 6 months, so I have a 37 Lincoln. I have a bunch of race cars that I race. But the cars I really love now, the cars that I own now are the ones that I will never sell. They're the ones I really love, and they're actually not super fancy. But I have a great Mini Cooper S mid-60s that I'm working on. But the Pantera, I have to tell you, it's a shocker to me. I drove it. I could not believe it. I drove it from Watkins Glen back here to Detroit. I got it to 160 miles an hour. It was comfortable. My security team was really upset at me behind me. They were trying to catch me in an expedition. No chance. The suspension is really compliant. I got the seat adjusted so I can fit. I'm 6 feet. It's very comfortable. There's a bunch of stuff to do on the car. And the cool thing about Panteras is you can change them subtly, the color of the wheels, and people aren't upset. It's like a cool community where they're okay with you changing the car, which I always like making my car a little unique. And I think it's a keeper. I really do. I love the mid-engine. It's a beautiful design. It's a great car, and it's a Ford. You can go to Harbor Freight and get stuff to work on. It doesn't require anything fancy, but it's a really beautiful, well-driving, mid-engined, powerful 60s, 70s Italian car. I mean, to me, it probably drives better than a Miura, but I only spent $100,000 on it, not $3 million.
Well, I'd love to hear the story as it unfolds, and we'd love to hear what you pick up next on BAT.
I'm always looking.
Always looking around.
Ford Man 21. If you go up against me, please. I have no life outside of Ford. So if you're going to bid against me, just please, if you really don't want the car, let me have it, okay? Go easy on me.
I love that. We've never had anybody plead against bidders on the podcast, but it's a good venue for that.
Your bidders are really good and they're tough. And I've lost a lot of cars in the last $1,000. Drives me nuts. My wife's like, "Why are you depressed?" I really wanted that car, but it went over my budget.
Yeah, regret's bitter. Regret is bitter the day after auctions. That's for sure. Well, Jim, thank you so much. Thanks for being part of BAT and everything we do. You're right in the heart of our ethos of loving cars and loving getting involved and loving.
Randy, you are awesome. You were so much fun to interview for my podcast. I love what you guys do. And most of all, I love your whole user community. I'm part of it. And, the only thing I would ask is if all of you think about buying a Ford, just think about all the families, the 180,000 people that you affect. The profit and the IP stays here in America. We're all trying to make it through life here with our kids and our family. And, when you buy Ford, you really affect all of our lives positively. So thank you.
I appreciate that. Don't mind giving you the platform for that message at all. It's a good message. It's nice to be part of something.
That's why I'm here.
Honest like that. Yeah, absolutely.
That's why I'm here.
Well, thanks for your time. I hope we get to link up again at a racetrack or a car event somewhere. And thanks for supporting us. And thanks to everybody out there for listening to Jim and me have a little bit of fun talking about cars, and join us for the next BAT podcast.
Thank you, Randy.